in my opinion, above all the other human conditions in this realm, the one that is by far the most troubling, the most disturbing, is that of human suffering. In the work that I do, I come across suffering every day, and not just externally, but my own suffering, because it is difficult to hear other people who are suffering and not get pulled into that suffering. Emotion is a strong thing. It affects not only the person who's delivering the story, but the recipient of the story. And if you're a good storyteller, you can totally engage the other person. Today, I want to tell you something. I want to share this with you because I had to discover this. And as I grow and as I age, I'm still learning, which is the beautiful thing about learning in this world, right? If you have suffered, most of us have, or will encounter suffering, the important thing about suffering is not to allow it to bring you along with it. Let me say that again. The important thing about suffering is to not allow the suffering to command or control your life. Whether it's form of suffering or current suffering, you need to rise above the suffering. You need to channel the suffering. You need to take control of the experience and allow that experience to serve a greater value in your life. A lot of people have asked me, how did I get past my childhood pain? That's how I did it. I did not attribute the suffering that I had endured as being more monumental than the journey that I chose to embark on. You get to choose. You get to dictate where you go from here. I'm not saying that where you are at right now is not painful, is not hard, is not difficult, is not something that needs to be overcome. I'm not minimizing your tragedy. I'm not minimizing your trauma or your drama. What I'm saying to you is, if you were dealt all deuces and trees in your hand, make the most out of the hand you were dealt. And you've heard that before. But the difference is not allowing the hand to dictate your demise. You have to decide what you're going to do with the hand that you were dealt. Our parents, and it's true, there's no parent handbook on how to be a good parent. If there was a handbook, I think the handbook is the opposite, really. How not to show up as a parent. Most parents are just people. Most parents are just ordinary people struggling to raise children, whether they're children that they plan for or unplanned children. Most parents show up the best way they can, and you've heard that. And the best way they can doesn't mean they're doing the best they can. The best way they can, for me, also always refers to their mental capacity. And in examining my parents, because I had to do that, I had to go inward, I had to become introspective, I had to look at my mother and father, and I had to say to myself, you know what? These two people are just children. Even as a child, I understood that these two people were children. They were children playing at being parents. They were children who did not understand what it took to be a parent, but they were mimicking behaviors that they had seen other people do. And that did not take into account personality or character or mental disorders or their own pain and suffering that they had not dealt with, or issues that were beyond their own comprehension. All they knew is that they had to show up as parents, and they showed up. How many of us are the prodigy of such parenting? How many of us look at our parents, or in hindsight bias, or and say, you know what, man, I think my dad was bipolar. I think my mom was a narcissist. Or I think my dad had BPD, borderline personality disorder. Or I think my mom really was attention seeking and had an addictive personality. How many of us can go back at our childhoods and analyze the childhood from the perspective of the psychologist. Not many of us do that. Instead, what we come away with is, man, my dad was a hard man. My mother, she sure was messed up, sure was undisciplined. My dad, he had anger issues. He would get angry. He was mean. He would, my mom, she was rude. She didn't know how to talk to us, or, she was abusive physically. And a lot of us don't even say physically abused, because I grew up in the Caribbean and there was not such a terminology as physical abuse. Otherwise, that window stick, man, a lot of us would call a lot of us would call the police if we knew that it was physical abuse or getting a shoe thrown at your head. There's so many cultures that cannot even use psychology to explain the behavior of growing up in a household that has, evolved into these terminologies. My partner says, that there's certain environments where ADHD cannot exist, where being schizophrenic or being out of your mind is not a thing. And it's true. Not only are there environments, but there are populations and cultures that do not make any room for any lack of mental incapacitation. If you're mentally incapacitated, you have to deal. You have to go to school, do what your parents tell you to do. And if you don't act right, there's consequences for that. But when you think about the lack of intelligence or the lack of knowledge, we have more knowledge now at our fingertips than we've ever had before in this century, right? We can look back and say, hey, you know what? Mom had ADHD because she would cook on the stove, go wash and forget that the stove was on, or she would, send us to school and then have to show it at school with our lunch boxes. We can say stuff like that. Or we can say, you know what? My father had anger management issues. He went from 0 to 100 in 2.2 seconds. So therefore, I should be able to monitor these behaviors and look at myself and realize that there's a slim possibility that those behaviors that I witnessed in my parents might also transcend to me. That's the introspection that I'm talking about here today. How many of you can look in the mirror, look at yourselves objectively, make comparisons, look at past patterns of behaviors from your childhood or within your parents or even family members and say, you know what? There's a likelihood that this is who I am. And instead of me ignoring the truth, how about I acknowledge that this might be truth, deal with the truth so that I can become a better person for my family and for myself. That's all it's about. Knowledge is power. We say this all the time. We say knowledge is power, but yet when we're presented with knowledge, we ignore the truth, we ignore the knowledge and pretend like we don't have it. And we constantly show up in life, always expecting somebody else to give us an answer that we already have access to. And if you don't have access to it, there's no excuse. There's no excuse not to go looking for it. And that, again, is taking an introspective approach to trying to figure out who you are, why you do the things you do, and understanding how that not only affects you as a person, but affects other people you come into contact with. It's time to take an account of yourself. It's time to look inward. It's time to acknowledge truth. It's not an easy thing looking at yourself. Trust me, it's not an easy thing looking at yourself and saying this is the good, the bad, the ugly, and the indifferent. But it's necessary. You cannot separate yourself in these tiny little fragments, put them apart from each other, and think that you're going to live a whole life. It doesn't work like that. You have to bring all four elements, all four fragmentations of yourself and say, this is who I am, and this is all part of me. Integrate that, and then become your best self. It sounds like a lot of work, right? It is a lot of work. I'm not going to lie to you. You think I got here by not working? You think that I didn't have to do the things that I'm asking you to do? It is a lot of work investing the time in yourself so that you can truly understand what makes you tick. In psychological terms, what are your triggers? What triggers your responses and your reactions? If you can understand that, then you can respond and react differently and in kind. My name is Ingrid Felton. As always, thank you for showing up today. Thank you for visiting the YouTube channel. Thank you for liking the videos. tell others about what I'm doing here. Please continue to support me. I'll continue to show up as long as you show up. And your comments are welcome. And I hope that you get some kind of measure of understanding from using the knowledge that was presented here today and how to make that work in your individualistic life and also your relationships. It starts with you. Bye.